Hi students, welcome to our second day in week 2. And today we're going to cover sentence types and common sentence errors. This is useful for writing your sentences in your essay assignment that's coming up this week. That's due next Monday. As well, there's a grammar quiz that's due this Friday before midnight as well. And we'll actually be covering how to write proper sentences and how to fix sentence errors. So the idea is you probably know how to write simple sentences, or you've tried writing complex sentences but probably made run-ons instead. So the key here is we want to convey or show complex ideas but without getting confused, either trying to do too many ideas in one sentence or mixing your ideas up, so getting complex without getting too complicated. So today's lecture will show you the skills in how to combine ideas or thoughts actually. A thought is a sentence. A complete sentence is a thought. And then a complex sentence would be a complex thought. And we're going to look at that now. First, I'm going to show you 3 different sentences, and take some moment to pause the video and write down the sentences and look for similarities and differences between them. So I'll read them first. Look for similarities and differences. So first one, after 6 hours, the police finally let him go home. Number 2, after 6 hours, the police finally let him go home, but they kept his wife for another 2 hours. Number 3, while the police finally let him go home after 6 hours, they kept his wife for another 2 hours. So go ahead. Write down the sentences if you have to. Find the similarities and differences between these 3 sentences. Hint, look for the clauses in each sentence and see if they're the same or different. And look for the different punctuations and subordinating conjunctions and introduction words as well. We've covered those in yesterday's lecture. Did you find any similarities and differences? Well, let's take a look with the first sentence. And first we're going to find the different clauses. Here, we'll read the first one again, after 6 hours. So that's a dependent clause. Actually, it's not a clause at all. There's no subject or verb. It's an introductory phrase. The first clause is actually the police, subject, finally, that's an adverb. Let him, let here is a verb, him go home is the object. And the rest of this would be the predicate. So here we have clause 1. The police let him go home. Alright, let's take a look at the second sentence. Alright, so to review, we have the first clause. The police finally let him go home. These sentences are related, so we have the introductory phrase here. And then the clause here. Subject, verb, and object. How about the next sentence? We have the same introductory phrase, so these are the same. That's a similarity. The police finally let him go home. That's the same too. Okay, same subject, same verb, same object, the same words. Now there's more information. We have a comma and a subordinating conjunction. And this is a contrasting subordinating conjunction. But, okay, so what do we have? They kept his wife for another 2 hours. So they here refers to the police, subject, kept is the verb, and his wife is the object. And the rest of it would form the predicate. Kept his wife for another 6 hours. So we have clause 2 now. So that's a difference between sentence 1 and sentence 2. They added something. They, and that's the police. I'm just going to write the police kept his wife for another 6 hours. Okay, so that's clause 2. Here we have a sentence that connects the two independent clauses together, clause 1 and clause 2, with a comma and a subordinating conjunction. Alright, now let's take a look at sentence 3. While the police finally let him go home after 6 hours, they kept his wife for another 2 hours. Let's find the clauses first. The police finally let him go home. So clause 1 is here. And then the introductory phrase is now placed after the clause 1. And notice, when you place an introductory phrase after the clause, you don't need a comma. You see? But here you have another word, while. So this is related to but. And notice the location of the comma. The location of the comma stays the same. But instead of a subordinating conjunction, but, now you have the word while here. And it still shows the contrast. Here they kept his wife for another 2 hours. Here we have clause 2. Okay, so another difference is the similarity is the comma use or location between sentences 2 and 3 are the same. But the connecting word in sentences 2 and 3 are different. They have a different word and a different location. In sentence 2, it's placed as a coordinating conjunction in the middle of the sentence between the two clauses. And in sentence 3, you have a transition word, while, at the beginning of the sentence. So those are some similarities and differences between these sentences, which is showing a complex thought. Two clauses. Clause 1, the police finally let him go home. And clause 2, the police kept his wife for another 6 hours. And there's extra details too. Sorry, that's not 6 hours, is 2 hours for the wife. But the husband had to stay 6 hours. So that's a detail there. Alright, there's one more sentence for us to look at. which is even more complicated. Let's take a look, or more complex. See if you can find the clause in this sentence. The clauses. Take a moment to write the sentence down. Note any new punctuation. For example, the semicolon and the transition word. And a new connecting word. And a new clause. Did you find them? Let's take a look. So after 6 hours, that's the same. So now, this one is the same as sentences 1 and 2. You have the introductory phrase with the comma. So it's different from sentence 3, which is using while. The police finally let him go home. So that's clause 1. That's the same as every sentence we had so far. However, instead of a comma and a subordinating conjunction, you have semicolon and transition word and however to show the contrast between the two clauses and to write them as separate sentences. And here's why. You have clause 2, they kept his wife for another 2 hours, so that's clause 2. So now we have a new clause right here. So clause 3, you have she, that's the wife, subject, had assaulted, that's the verb, and object, the officer, who arrested them. Okay, so the wife, that's the pronoun she that is referring to, had assaulted the officer, and then the preposition phrase, who arrested them. And the connecting word between clause 2 and clause 3 is the word because. And clause 3 explains why the police kept his wife for another 2 hours. Well, here the clause 3 explains that the wife committed another crime, or committed an actual crime that we see in the sentence, assaulting a police officer. So she had to stay longer because her actions are more severe, worse. We don't know what the husband did, but the wife did something more, which made the police keep her for another 2 hours. And the connecting word here is because, which connects clause 2 and 3 together. And because clause 2 and 3 are connected, instead of using a period, you need to use a semicolon to keep clause 1 separate from clause 2 and 3, which is combined into one big clause. So here you have actually 3 clauses in one sentence. And we actually have names for these types of sentences. And so what we're going to do next is we're going to look at the different types of sentences. If you have written these 4 sentences, you can actually use the notes from the next slides, and I'm going to show you how to take notes from this and to identify these 4 sentences too. So let's try that now. So I have right here first the key terms for sentences. So we're gonna need to look at those. So 1, we have a dependent clause. 2, an independent clause. This will be review, you should know what these are. 3, a simple sentence. And now, some new things. By combining clauses together, you're going to make more complex sentences. And the first type of complex sentence is called a compound sentence. And the next type is a complex sentence. And you can take a moment to see the difference between a compound sentence and a complex sentence. We're going to go over these details using the Cornell Notes system. Now there's actually going to be one more on the slide. And that's number 6, the complex compound sentence. And we're going to note what that is and how to use it. So here we're going to try using the Cornell Note system. So here I'm going to have my cue and my summary. So cue here. Details here. So this will be the first demonstration of taking notes of a lecture this time using the Cornell Note system in week 2. And the summary. So if you're still stuck or you still want more practice taking Cornell notes in your lecture, this video demonstration will help you. So far, for this lecture, you're going to look at different sentence types. And you know there are 6 types in this lecture. So I'm going to prepare space. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's going to be sentence types and sentence problems as well. I'm probably going to make a new page for sentence problems. So let's see if I can remember the types. If you don't, that's okay. You can go back and forth with the slide. Well, you have the first type, which isn't really a sentence, but and I'm going to write something for you here. It's going to be called a sentence fragment. Now I've seen some of these in your summary writing, so avoid making sentence fragments. So those are called dependent clauses. The next is an independent clause. So that is a sentence. Then you have a simple sentence, which is an independent clause. And then I'm going to rephrase this in a second. It says subject and verb. Okay. And what other sentences do we have? We have a compound sentence. And notice we have a different word here for the 5th type of sentence is a complex sentence. So those are different. And how are these different? Let's read the notes. It has two independent clauses. So we're using the second type, and we have 2 of them, and we join them together with a coordinating conjunction or a semicolon. And we're going to look at the examples later. So 2 independent clauses write it my way, joined by semicolon or comma and subordinating conjunction. Okay. Now, let's see what the complex sentence is and how that's different. The complex sentence has an independent clause and a dependent clause. So notice here, a compound sentence has two independent clauses. So it actually has two simple sentences. Here, in a complex sentence, it has two types of clauses. It has an independent clause, which can be its own sentence, and a dependent clause. So it doesn't need a subordinating conjunction because it has a dependent clause in it, which depends on the independent clause. So I'll write this down. A dependent clause and an independent clause. Okay. Now the last type of sentence. Compound complex. Let's see if I wrote this correctly. Ah, yes. Okay. So this is a bit more tricky. Let's see what the definition is for a compound complex sentence. It has one dependent clause, so one dependent clause, plus two independent clauses, and these three things are connected with a coordinating conjunction or a semicolon. So you have two big parts here. The first part is the dependent clause, and then the second part is two coordinating independent clauses connected by a coordinating conjunction and semicolon. In other words, you have a dependent clause and a compound sentence. So that's why it's called a compound complex sentence. So my way of writing this would be dependent clause plus, and it reads the same as a compound sentence, two independent clauses joined by a semicolon. So I'll write that, compound sentence. So now that we've looked at these 6 types, before we look at the examples, let's see if we can identify the early examples in the previous slides, the 4 sentences, and figure out which type is which. We have simple sentence, compound sentence, complex sentence, and complex compound sentences. Compound complex sentences. Let's take a look. After 6 hours, the police finally let him go home. So we have an introductory phrase, and then we have an independent clause. This is not a clause because there is no subject and no verb. So this is, what do you think? If you think simple sentence, you are correct. Alright, let's take a look at sentence 2. After 6 hours, police finally let him go home, but they kept his wife for another 2 hours. What do you think this is? If you said compound sentence, you are correct. First hint, you got a comma and a subordinating conjunction, which only happens in compound sentences. And to double check, look at the clauses. The first clause is an independent clause. You have the subject and verb, which can be its own sentence. And the next clause, they kept his wife, subject and verb. And you have object too. So you have two clauses that are independent, joined by, in this case, a comma and a subordinating conjunction. So it is a compound sentence. Now let's look at sentence 3. While the police finally let him go home after 6 hours, they kept his wife for another 2 hours. If you thought complex sentence, you are correct. There is no subordinating conjunction after the comma, just the comma by itself, and the while makes the first clause a dependent clause because, like prepositions, the word while changes the category of the clause from an independent clause, which can be its own sentence, to a dependent one. You need something, or while the police are doing something, or what is happening. The independent clause says, the police kept his wife for another 2 hours. So you have two different clauses, an independent one, which is clause 2, and then the first clause here, because it has the word while, and the prepositions also make clauses dependent, like when and where, would make the clause a dependent clause. So when you have a dependent clause and a independent clause in the same sentence, it would be a complex sentence. Now let's look at the last one. You can probably guess what it is. Now try and find the clauses here. Can you find them? First of all, if you guess compound complex sentence, you are correct. Well, it's the last type left anyway, so it's a good guess, process of elimination. But here's how it would work. You have the first clause, which is independent, but then it's also connecting a compound sentence. You can see that right here. Clause 2, they kept his wife for another 2 hours, and clause 3, she had assaulted a police officer. Here is connected by a conjunction word, because. Okay. So you have at least 3 clauses in a compound complex sentence that is joined by semicolon or a comma with a subordinating conjunction. Now, going back on the slides of the definitions and examples, let's do some examples. For the dependent clause, we need a subordinating conjunction, a subject, and a verb. So the example reads, because, that's my subordinating conjunction, I, that's the subject, and was, that's the verb, and then the rest of it, the object, which would make was a great student in grade 12, the whole predicate. But because you have the subordinating conjunction, it makes the clause a dependent one. You need more to make, you need another clause to make a complete sentence. So you need a subordinating conjunction plus subject plus verb and other things. Alright, let's read the independent clause. An independent clause is actually simpler than a dependent clause because it doesn't have a subordinated conjunction. A simple subject and verb sentence is enough to make it independent. I is the subject, and was is the verb. And then you have object here. Well, I was an excellent student. And that's kind of it, really. So note here, for independent clause, it is a complete sentence. So I'll write that down. Perhaps instead, since I already wrote subject and verb, I'll use an example. I study. Subject and verb. And that's enough. And let's try an example for dependent clause. I need a subordinating conjunction, like when I study. I need more. So this is not a sentence. Not a sentence. And this is a sentence. Like that. Alright. A simple sentence. A simple sentence is an independent clause, so these two are definitely related. But notice, a simple sentence can have more things than just an independent clause. It can have a list, perhaps, such as reading, writing, and discussion. But here you see it still has subject and verb, and then object. In this case is many academic activities. So, let's try it in our notes. So an example might be nope, that's later. I study English, French, and math. So while the sentence is longer, it's still a simple sentence because I only have an independent clause here, a subject and a verb. Alright, let's look at the harder sentences now, starting with the compound sentence. I'm going to probably need more space here, so I'm going to use 4, 5, and 6. Now, the organization here in my notes is I probably should have left more space for 4, 5, and 6 because it is more complex and needs more detail. But whatever you do, make sure your notes is organized. So in my case, I make sure to use arrows to connect the examples to the definitions so I can still read it and understand it later after the lecture. So let's see the example here for a compound sentence. So the compound sentence, you need two independent clauses that is joined by a coordinating conjunction or a semicolon. And let's take a look at the example. Clause 1. I was an excellent student in high school. That's 1. I think I will do well in university too. Clause 2. These two are independent clauses and it's joined by coordinating conjunction with a comma. So that's the first type. I'll call this A. Okay, and B is the semicolon. So let's take a look at that. I was an excellent student in high school. Same clause. It's clause 1. Here we use the semicolon instead of comma and then we have clause 2. I will also do well in university. It's slightly different, but the meaning is the same. So I need two independent clauses here. So let's say I eat apples and I eat bananas 2. Or I eat apples, semicolon. I also eat bananas. So I have the two types right here. Subordinating conjunction with a comma and semicolon. And I got my two clauses right here. In my notes, I'm actually practicing writing the sentences in my own example. Alright, let's take a look at complex sentence now. Here we need an independent clause and a dependent clause. The dependent clause here is because I was an excellent student in high school. Remember, because is a subordinating conjunction here, which makes the clause dependent. And then you have a comma. I think I will be successful in university. So clause 1 and clause 2. So let's try it with our own example. And I encourage you to do the same. So I'll use a subordinating conjunction like when I eat apples, I eat bananas 2. Now here, I made clause 1 dependent because I added the when as a subordinating conjunction. And it changes the meaning of the sentence a little bit. Here it just says, I eat apples in general, and I eat bananas in general too. But here, in the fifth type of sentence, I'm actually saying, when I eat an apple, or when I eat apples, I eat bananas at the same time. So that's what's happening here. But here's the example of a complex sentence, a dependent clause and an independent clause. Let's take a look at the last type. A compound complex sentence. Now, according to this slide, the rule goes like this. You need a dependent clause. So, this first clause right here is dependent because it has the coordinating conjunction despite. The fact that many students achieve, this is verb, success, that's the object, without much work in high school. And now we have two independent clauses. We're going to look for those. They realize in their first semester, post-secondary, that they are not ready for the challenges of university. So this sentence is quite long. So we have they, which is the student's subject. Realize is the verb. And then this whole part here, you have in their first semester. So that's when they realize something. And then that they are not ready for the challenges of university. This part is what they realize. So we have the when phrase and the what phrase here. Okay? But regardless, you have an independent clause because it has a subject and a verb. And then look, you got a coordinating conjunction with a comma here, which connects to clause number, this is 1, this is 2, and clause 3. That they do not have, or they don't have, so subject again, students don't have, verb, the necessary study skills to overcome these challenges. So we have a noun phrase for the object here. It's a noun phrase which talks about the skills that they need to overcome the challenges of, in this case, university or college, post-secondary education. So again, we need a dependent clause and two independent clauses that is connected with a coordinating conjunction or a semicolon. And do you remember what the second part is? That's a compound sentence. So let's try an example here. To help me remember, I'm going to try writing one. I like eating fruits. So I have my dependent clause here. I use the word while as the subordinating conjunction to make this clause dependent. I like eating meat, and I like eating vegetables too. So here we have the dependent clause right here, followed by a compound sentence. I like eating meat, and I like eating vegetables too. So here we have a compound complex sentence. So I'm going to stop here for the first part of lecture 1, and the second part will be sentence problems. So we have, looking at the cues, the sentence types. So we have independent, we have a dependent clause, before that is a sentence types. So we have 1 dependent clause, 2 independent clause, 3 simple sentence, 4 compound sentence, 5 complex sentence, and 6 compound complex sentence. And these cues should help me think about and remember the definition, the parts of each type of sentence, and an example for each one. So I would know the rules and the how to use these different types of sentences in my writing. So if I were to summarize this lecture, I'd say this page of notes, or something like this, summarizes the 6 types of sentences that I can use in my academic writing. And there you go. And that's just part 1 of our first lecture, looking at sentence types. So stay tuned for the next part, sentence problems and how to fix them.